Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please just give us a few moments to allow people to filter into the room, and then we'll get started. All right, I'm still seeing people filter in. Go ahead and drop in the chat in the meantime where you're tuning in from, and we will get started in just a moment. Alrighty, thank you guys for joining us today for our April Higher Education Demand Trends webinar. This month, we're going to dig into what the data is actually telling us about student demand, employer needs, and where institutions should be paying attention right now. Today's session is going to cover the latest enrollment trends, shifts in student interest, and as well as job postings data and revealing the current workforce landscape. Before we jump in, just a quick couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, and we will share the slides and recording with you after the webinar. If you have questions at any point, please drop them into the Q&A. We will answer as many as we can during the session. We will leave some time at the end if we have additional questions, and if we don't get to yours, someone from our team will reach out. We also encourage you to use the chat to introduce yourself and the institution. But with that, I'm happy to introduce Bob Atkins, founder and CEO of GrayDI. Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Regan, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to join us. And I hope I'll give you some good new information about what's going on in higher ed. A little bit on the agenda here. We're going to start out with just a brief overview of what a program evaluation system is. That, of course, is GrayDI's core business. Then I'll talk about student demand indicators, what's going on out there on the student front. We'll turn to employment, what's happening in tech, and then I'll share with you some news from the front on AI, which is our experience in rolling out AI applications. A lot of stuff is happening in that context that surprised me, and I thought might be useful to all of you as you proceed with your AI initiatives. So with that, let's take a look at what a program evaluation system is. Importantly, it's more than data or software. It starts with information on your markets, what students need, what employers want, and how much competition is there. We'll spend our time today primarily in that cell. In addition, you need to understand the economics of your programs. What is the revenue, cost, and margin of departments, programs, courses, sections, instructors, so you can make good decisions about what programs to invest in, where you may want to pull back, and therefore how you generate enough money to fund programs that may not be carrying their own weight financially, and importantly, to fund your mission. As part of that analysis, you also need to look at the academic performance of your programs. What is the revenue? Are they performing up to snuff? Or the right number of students graduating? Are they passing external exams? Is the content appropriate and the rigor appropriate for your institution? And last but far from least is mission. That's why we're here. Higher ed is not, in general, a for-profit operation, but we do need the margins in order to fund that mission. So keeping that in mind as we evaluate our programs is very important. But the data, our software even, and it's just not enough. There's no algorithm to tell you what academic programs to start, stop, sustain, or grow. For that, you need a good process with the right participants. So engaging the right people, giving them the right information, creating an environment in which they can do a sound evaluation and talk to each other about what their thoughts are without having it become a long chain of phone tag and email tag that drags out over many months. That's very important because otherwise the process is perceived as political, and it in fact may be political as well. So getting all that out and being able to look at it in effect in public in front of a group is very important to having a credible program evaluation process. That in turn helps a lot in getting the difficult decisions made and supported within the institution. But that one-time kind of evaluation is not the whole story. And in addition to that, you need to manage your programs on a regular basis. And I would say at a minimum, you need to be looking at programs once a year And for many of you, that may sound just overwhelming. If you don't have the systems to support that, it is in fact impossible. But with the right software and data, you can look at them frequently without it becoming an onerous task. So it's important. Our world is changing very fast. There are programs that are moving up in the ranks that were hardly visible a few years ago. Think of AI. There are others that have been falling back, and we need to be readjusting our resources accordingly so that we can sustain the financial operations of the institution. So that's a little bit about what a program evaluation system is. If you want to learn more, you're welcome to read my book, Stop, Start, or Grow, which is a description of an effective way to do program evaluation and management. Student demand indicators. Let's take a look at first at Google keywords. And in terms of how to read this chart, you can see 2024 is the dark blue bar, the medium bar is 2025, and the light blue bar is 2026. What we're hoping to see is those bars marching up from left to right. As you can tell, that's not exactly what's happening right now. The Google search volumes for academic programs are off by 35%. Now, I hope you haven't fallen out of your chair. I don't think that is a meaningful indicator of the interest in higher ed at this point. The problem is that we're shifting from keyword search to AI search. So most of that drop is just a change in how people search. As of yet, we have not found a reliable source of information for volumes of AI search. When we do, we'll begin to change this chart. In the meantime, I would say this overall trend, worth knowing about. It may be a warning signal, but I don't think so. The underlying data, however, about individual programs, when compared to one to another, we can normalize and understand what the relative growth is of one program. Presumably, this macro effect is happening evenly across all programs, so it washes out when you're trying to compare one program versus another. But I would not look at the growth rates of individual programs in isolation, because they're likely to show this big decline too, and that would be very misleading. You need to be looking at them one relative to another, which is why we do things like percentiling, as you'll see later on. So what is growing? So despite that 35% overall drop, there are programs where Google search volume is up. Keep in mind that means the underlying student demand for these programs is up even more than these numbers in all likelihood. Recently, we have not been seeing healthcare in these top 10. That changed, well, not substantially. That changed this month. We've got 4 of our top 10 are healthcare programs: pharmacology, radiation therapy, perfusion tech, and health and fitness general. Now, this is the most surprising to me. The second highest number of programs is in what I would call arts and design. Not, again, a group of things that you would expect to see in the top 10, but here they are. 3D modeling and design tech, acting, design and drafting, drama, and theater. So while I think we're all familiar with the employment outcomes for some of these programs, students are still interested, and that interest is growing, which, again, I find surprising. There must be some underlying social trend that's causing people to look more at these more creative programs. Perhaps it's a refuge from all technology we're all facing right now. And finally, we have engineering mechanics and economics and econometrics, both growing quite crisply. Let's shift over now and look at enrollment. And we're going to do that by degree level, from certificate to associate to bachelor's to doctoral. Good news on fall enrollment. This is total enrollment. It's up 3% year over year at the community college level. This is for associate and certificate awards. So we've sustained growth here into 25, 26. And I have to say that Massachusetts is helping out here. They've offered free community college throughout the state, and we're up some 20,000 students in Massachusetts. You'll notice that doesn't explain the whole increase here. I was sort of hoping we could say it did, but no, not so. It's about an eighth of the total increase is happening here in Massachusetts. So free matters. I am concerned as we offer community college for free. There have been some negative consequences of that when it was tried earlier. There was a program, a grant program in Massachusetts for students who had honors level grades. And it did cause a shift of students from 4-year colleges to 2-year colleges. and it did increase the number of people enrolled in college. However, in the long term, it turned out that the number of graduates actually went down. There was some sort of an effect when those relatively talented students went to community colleges that the outcomes deteriorated. I don't know why. So I'm worried a little bit that, at least here in Massachusetts, that we may inadvertently have that same effect as people who could have gone and thrived in a four-year college start in community college and for some reason don't matriculate. Now, let's take a look at certificate fall enrollment, the 5-year average annual growth at the certificate level. Again, we see pretty strong showing by health. The number 1, 6, and 7 programs here, medical health management, clinical assistant specialist, up 37%. And we have health and wellness general and rad tech up 15% each. Then we see career and technical education doing very well with 4 slots. Auto body collision repair tech, aircraft airframe maintenance tech. That's, by the way, not airplane engine tech. It's a different part of the career path there. Although, no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Aircraft maintenance would include that. And then we have building construction, site management up 15%, and electrician up 13%. And then we have some more infotech kinds of programs up healthy numbers. Cybersecurity up 18% over the last 5 years. This has been a persistent grower. As I often say, it's been large for a while, and it's still continued to grow fast. And on the employment side, I don't see any diminution in the need for cybersecurity. The stuff keeps coming into my inbox, as I'm sure it does to yours, and the thieves are there, ever present. It's like getting mugged in your email. Information technology up 16%, and geographic infoscience and cartography up 14%. This one, by the way, has been persistent recently, the infoscience and cartography. I think it's used to be, sort of generally called GIS and sort of a laggard, but now there seems to be a burgeoning interest in that field, which is interesting. I suspect somewhat tied to drones and such, but in any case, growing. I apologize, my cursor's going crazy on me. So let's take a look at the 5-year growth rate at the associate level. Again, we see health very dominant here. Diagnostic medical sonography, health services, rad tech in our top 4, all growing 15% or more. And then we have surge tech growing 9%. Career and technical education is 4 slots: HVAC maintenance tech, that airframe mechanic, and cosmetology and welding. So as I look at these lower degree levels, what I think I'm seeing is hands-on programs in particular seem to be doing very well, the career and technical education things. And you'll see as we move up the degree levels that those start to become less prominent on these pages. But we have 2 here that are more hands-off or analytical kinds of programs: cybersecurity and natural sciences, both up well over 10%. So let's see. Now let's switch over to the bachelor's level. We're seeing some sustained growth here, which is welcome, up 2% for the last couple of years. And it's a nice turnaround. We're standing right at the edge of the alleged demographic cliff. So one would expect these numbers to begin to decline. As many of you have heard from me before, I don't think that cliff is really a real thing. There is a slight decline in the number of people 18 years and older that's going to be coming up. When you net it all out, it's about a 1% decline per year. So that's not a cliff. Let's just be clear. It is a decline. It is a headwind. However, the number of people 18 to 24 is a very weak indicator of enrollment. There are many other factors that play into enrollment. So whether that will prove to be determinative in terms of the number of people enrolled in higher education remains to be seen. There are other things that worry me more in terms of enrollment. I'll come to that in just a moment. So fastest growing fall enrollment at the bachelor's level over the last 5 years. Number 1 is cybersecurity, not a surprise. We have software engineering in these tech and engineering spaces. Aerospace, this has become a really fast growing field. I don't know how practical it is for many of you to get into it, but we're starting to see aerospace crop up in the top 10 very consistently. Construction and engineering tech also up 6%. Then we have business and finance doing very well, 17% growth in business analytics, 7% growth in finance, 6% growth in logistics and supply chain. This business analytics is a bit like cybersecurity. Used to be a relatively small program. It's been growing. Now it's no longer a small program, and it continues to grow at strong double-digit rates. So if you're not in that space, there are a number of different programs you can offer in and around business analytics, and they attract a lot of students. I think it's one of the places people will go is some of the bloom comes off computer science because of AI. I'll come back to that again. So now we only have two health here, which I found interesting. Exercise physiology and health services, allied health general. So it's a big switch as you move up to the bachelor's level in terms of what kinds of programs are interesting, with big drop off in health programs. Normally we'd see, nursing honestly would be here if it weren't for all the constraints on nursing, the regulatory constraints and boards of nursing and such. And for that matter, the space in hospitals to do the training. But so that's artificially suppressed. It's not a matter of how many students want it. It's just difficult to scale it up. So health would be a little bit more represented if those limitations weren't there. But we do see those top two persistent through this period, again, become large and then continue to grow. Both cybersecurity and business analytics are probably the most persistent trends I've seen in our data over the last few years. Now let's take a look at the doctoral master's level. I think this is a bit of a misleading chart. So yes, the numbers are up 1% coming into fall 2025-26. That's a full year ago. That's last fall. Now, keep in mind that since then, as we'll talk about, the international demand has dropped off very substantially. So I suspect while it looks okay now, we're going to see a very rapid decline in master's and doctoral enrollment because we're going to lose a majority of those students over the next few years. Obvious reason is immigration changes. What is hot? Well, I mentioned data analytics, data science, very much so, especially at the master's level. Business analytics, also very hot, again, probably primarily at the master's level. And then we have computer science and cybersecurity dropping off a little bit here. I don't think there's a lot of need for cybersecurity professionals at the doctoral level outside of higher ed. But it's not a credential that I think would make much difference in the job market yet. Masters definitely could, and bachelors absolutely. So one of the opportunities here, by the way, is there are a lot of folks who are in cybersecurity that may have a certificate or an associate's degree, but they can't move up in their jobs without a bachelor's. So for those of you who can pick up those adult learners and get them to a bachelor's degree, I think it's a very interesting growth opportunity, both because the field itself is growing and because those potential students need an additional degree in order to move up within organizations. And then we have a stack of health, mental health counseling, clinical medical social work, applied behavior analysis, nurse anesthetist, osteopathic medicine, and biomedical sciences. So we're back, as we saw at the beginning with the associate's degrees. At the doctoral level, we actually have a very high prevalence of growing healthcare programs. Now let's shift gears and look a little bit at each international. And I stole my own thunder here. I recognize that. I think we're all thought international might be down. It is actually down 65% year over year in terms of international page views, which are an indicator of the level of interest in degrees in the US. And our database now includes China, but we don't have a full year of data on China yet. So it's not in our year over year numbers. And as you'll see then, and not in our origin countries. So India, it would be the largest, by the way, if it were on the chart. Highest page views origin countries, India, followed by Nigeria, Pakistan, Mexico is a new entrant on this list, Bangladesh, Ghana, Turkey, Brazil, UK, and Nepal. And I always find this list interesting in terms of countries that make it on here. And they're just not all countries that I would expect to see in the top 10 list of places that want to come get educated in the US. Ghana, for example. Just wouldn't have occurred to me. Nepal is a country that you don't think of much except for Mount Everest, and yet it's one of the top 10 potential countries for students interested in the U.S. India, not surprising to see that at the top. Pakistan also, just very large countries where education's very well regarded, and U.S. education is as well. So the reason I bring it up is when you're doing work in international, there are a few things that are really critical to success. One is you need a portfolio of countries, because any one country, for a variety of reasons, can suddenly drop out. It could be a change in the government in that country, could be a change in U.S. visa policies, it could be a war. I mean, there are just a lot of things that can take one country off the list for a period of time. Iran used to be on the top of this list, for example. Not the top, but top 2 or 3. So you need a portfolio of countries. Second, you need to know what specific programs people are interested in each of these countries, because it varies. And you need to be able to drill down, which I won't do today, but drill down to the individual city level, because you get variations at that level as well. And if you can find that right combination of cities and programs, you can market very inexpensively in these countries, literally 100 times less cost per click than you would see in the US. So while the conversion rates are not the same, the cost to advertise is so much lower that it can be a very attractive way to recruit students. But you need to be specific at that geographic and program level to do it effectively. So that's why we do this. Now let's take a look at the fastest growing. You'll see I put growing in quotes this month, programs at the bachelor's and master's level. These programs, by and large, ain't growing. They're just declining less quickly than the others. So we have 2 at the bachelor's level who managed to stay above water: arts, entertainment, and media management, and for some reason, linguistics. After that, things are down at least 16%. And by the time you get to the 10th program, it's already down 31%, and obviously gets worse from there. So among those others, kinesiology, political science, musical performance, I don't recall ever seeing that on this list before, animal sciences, physics, economics, almost always here, business administration, of course, and electrical and computer engineering is one I would expect to see. Usually not down 31%, but still a popular program among international students. At the master's level, it's a wipeout. There isn't a single program that isn't going down. The least decline is mathematics. After that, everything's down 40% or more. So it's really just a general wipeout among master's programs. And I expect we'd see the same thing at the doctoral level. So unfortunately, I suspect this is going to ripple through higher ed. It probably is already an issue on many of your campuses. I did a rough estimate on the impact of this decline on the total higher ed market. As I recall, it is about an $8 billion revenue loss that we're about to see. So that's not quite COVID level, but it's a real hit to many colleges. And of course, many of these students were full pay. So not only is it a lot of revenue, but it was very high margin revenue as well. So now let's take a look at what's going on the employment side. And here again, you see the shaded bars. The light blue bar is this year in this chart, and it's up 15%. So if you look at this, it's interesting. Last year, probably is roughly coincident with tariffs, you saw a quick drop off in job postings. Then starting September, it began to bounce around. And coming into this year, job postings have been steadily increasing. I can only say the US economy is unbelievably resilient. We've done all sorts of things that should have taken the economy down, whether that's cutting, close to 200,000 federal jobs, which should have an impact. Imposing tariffs should have had an impact. Going to war should have had an impact. High oil prices should have had an impact. And here we are. It's still growing. So hats off to the US economy. It's incredible that it sustains this over time. So through all the stuff we've been through recently. Unfortunately, that is not great for higher ed. I mentioned that there are other things that drive the enrollment in college besides pure demographics. The economy is the number one driver. And when the economy grows, enrollment in higher ed tends to decline and vice versa. So increases in the job market are likely to result in decreases in enrollment. A way of thinking about it is that enrollment is directly correlated with the change in the unemployment rate. So as unemployment goes up, enrollment goes up. As unemployment goes down, enrollment goes down. In some fields, that correlation is extremely high. You get into the trades, it runs up into the 90% range. In others, it's not quite as correlated. And it's not a perfect predictor by a long shot, but the R squared on it is a great deal stronger than population. So if you're looking for something to keep an eye on and ways to predict what's going to be happening, I would keep a close eye on the unemployment rate as an indicator of potential future demand for higher ed. Despite these job posting numbers, by the way, the unemployment rate is creeping up. So not a lot, but sort of a tenth of a point. So there are a lot of conflicting indicators in the economy right now. And so this is a pair of them, if you will, an increase in job postings and yet an increase in unemployment at the same time. So fastest growing job postings, where are those jobs? Well, it turns out we've got a stack up here in what we call other. So industrial engineers, followed by truck drivers, followed by physical therapists and software testers. I don't think you could come up with a more eclectic group of things to be growing. I can't begin to imagine what the trend is that underlies all that. After that, it gets a little clearer. It's about business and management. We've got marketing managers, financial managers, real estate agents, general and operations managers, project management specialists, and construction managers, all up over 25%. So there are some sectors of job postings that are growing very rapidly. Now, let's switch over and talk about skills. In March, the skills that were in greatest demand, first of all, was Amazon Web Services, up an astonishing 850%. Then we have some merchandise display. Then I'm going to jump down in operations business to bargaining, cross-functional collaboration, executive leadership, operational excellence, and stakeholder management. We do have 3 other software and tech jobs or skills that are up, cloud computing, AI, and data centers. No surprise there, I think, on that cluster. They almost all run together. AI drives demand for data centers, which is almost all cloud computing. And by the way, much of that gets done on Amazon Web Services. So for those of you who may not be familiar, that's Amazon's cloud computing platform that much of the internet runs on, and a great deal of AI computing is being done there. By the way, just a footnote. Many people are concerned with the environmental impact of AI, and it could be profound. It needs a lot of electricity and a lot of water. What I found when I dug into it for our providers, in particular Google, I haven't checked Amazon yet, is that they've actually gone out and purchased carbon offsets so that they are at currently carbon neutral. They haven't done as well on water. Their goal is to be water positive by 2030. They're obviously working on it, but they're well aware of the environmental footprint that they have and the concerns that it raises. And they're actively trying to mitigate those concerns, at least at Google. So keep that in mind. It is an issue, but there are ways to address it, and the firms are addressing it. Now, lest you think they're doing that out of the goodness of their heart, there are a couple of other reasons that they do it. One is, obviously, it affects demand. There are people who would prefer to be on a carbon neutral platform, and they'll migrate to one that is. On the waterfront and power, there's also a fundamental financial issue. Power costs money, and so does water. So they have a lot of incentive to reduce both, not out of the goodness of their heart, but because it's good for their pocketbook. So I think we can be comfortable they'll continue to work on making the compute more efficient. That said, there's a lot of demand for it because of AI. So it'll be a challenge to just keep up with the power requirements, regardless of whether they're ultimately carbon neutral or not. It's a lot of construction, a lot of power plants we're going to need. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what happens after graduation. We keep data on 30 million college graduates. Actually have data on 70 to 80 million college graduates. Of those, there are 30 million that are clean enough and complete enough for us to use in our analysis. And so when you look at those 30 million and say, where did they come from? Where do lawyers come from? It's a very eclectic answer. The biggest single thing is political science, but we also have, that's not a surprise. But we also have business and business programs that are graduating folks who later become lawyers. We have economics majors, English lit majors who become lawyers. So one of the things we found with labor market data is um, it is very it is not obvious how programs link to jobs. You need good empirical data to say, oh, I see. These people tend to go into those jobs. Because in truth, most jobs, especially management jobs, can accept people from almost any major, especially if they've grown up within a company to prove that they can be managers. By the time you've been there 3 or 4 years, nobody remembers if you're a history major or an accounting major, as long as you're enumerated as a history major. So people tend to end up over the course of their career going into a very wide variety of areas, typically hundreds. The mirror image of that is there are all sorts of different majors that are competing for a given job. In this case, these are the top 10 fields that would be competing to become lawyers. So it's a very heterogeneous environment. People who try and make simplistic statements about no jobs for history majors or psych majors, I can honestly tell you don't know what they're talking about. Usually haven't ever looked at the data. And then you have a problem that the data itself is often clouded. As any of you have been on my webinars before know, the NCS crosswalk underlies a lot of this. Right on the website, it says this crosswalk is not based on empirical data, and they're not kidding. History shows 6 occupations. When you look at real employment data of history graduates, you find they go into close to 500 different occupations, not 6. So it's just a much more complex phenomenon than people recognize. So let's take a look at one program. We're going to dive into computer science today. Many of you probably heard that the bloom is off the rose on computer science because of AI, and you can begin to see that in some of the data. And I'll go through and share a little bit about which data it's present in and where it's not really happening. The change is not really as big as people think. What we're looking here is U.S. bachelor's programs, and they're stacked from top to bottom in terms of total overall rating or scoring in our system, and we score on about 50 variables that you'll see in a minute. And you can see number 1 is aviation aeroscience. So I mentioned that earlier. I don't remember seeing this number 1 before this year. Maybe say in the last 12 months to be safe. So this has really moved up since we went around the moon, and in the lead up to that as well. Very high student demand, very high employment, and a lot of competition, but still, relatively little competition. 98th percentile. It's always high is always good in our percentiles. So not a lot of competition yet in that field. So if this is something that's accessible to you as an institution, very interesting space. I don't know if the demand will stay up after the moon launch, but it's substantial enough that even if it drifts down a little bit, it'll still be plenty. Number 10 on the list here is computer science. Now let's take a look at that. So what's going on with computer science in particular? Again, you're going to begin to see AI hitting this. So our Google search volumes are very strong. The overall indicators, absolute program size here, all very good. New student enrollments in the 99th percentile. You can all see the percentile ranks here. That dark green also means a 98th or higher percentile. The pinks, by the way, basically our color scale is green is good, pink is bad, and in between is just that. So moving down, one other thing that struck me here, for a program that could be done entirely online, computer science, you're looking at a computer, however you do it. I've been surprised at how little of this is actually done online. You've only got about 8,500 out of 76,000 completions done online for this program, which is nothing. It's 12% or so. But still, I would have expected something like this to be running 40, 50% by now, and it isn't. And it hasn't been moving very much. International, very interested in this program. It's the most popular program in international over the last 12 months. So that unfortunately, as we saw, is dropping off quite quickly. Now let's take a look at the change numbers. And this is where we begin to see the impact of AI. Google search is flat. New student enrollment down 12%. So students have gotten wind that there's impact in the job market. And they're beginning to be skeptical, I think, about this program and begin to look at other things. And completion volumes are still up. This is another really important aspect of the data. The student enrollment is current as of last fall. Completion volume, though, shows you how many people enrolled in this program 4 to 6 years ago and chose their major, and then ultimately graduated 4 to 6 years later. So we're looking at what the interest was, not now, but back in 2000. So be very careful with IPEDS completions as an indicator of current trends. It's out of date. It's a pretty good indicator of total volumes, especially for a large program like this, where those volumes don't change that much year to year. So, the 99th percentile that we saw up here for total online and on-ground completions, that's a good number. It's a really big program, and that's true, and it will be true for a while. But change numbers, you got to be more careful. Google's much more current enrollment, but it has its issue with the shift to AI. Enrollment, however, is a very reliable 97% of all students in the US are in that number, and it's updated 3 times a year for us. So when you're looking at trends, that's probably the most solid number to consider. And it's coming down. And 12% is not a trivial decline. So we look for international. We're down 19% in page views for international. After years of growth, we finally managed to fix that and make it decline. Unfortunate. Now let's take a look at employment, because the reason people are looking askance at this program is they think that there are no jobs for graduates. But take a look at the jobs. Job postings last 12 months, 174,000, 99th percentile. So they're only in our database of 1,000, 1,500 programs. There are 15 programs that have this many jobs. So we'll see in a moment that is coming down, but it's still enormous. Annual job openings, according to BLS, 72,000. That's a bit of a sketchy number. Some other time I'll walk you through why. Trends, though, we start to see some conflicting data. 3-year historic growth is still up 3% in terms of jobs, but last year it actually declined. And this is not a field that tends to decline very often. So that is a concern. Again, remains very large, but a little bit besieged. On the brighter side, we still have 2.3 job postings per graduate. So it's not as though we've suddenly been able to fill all the jobs for computer scientists. That's not the case, and it's not approximately the case. That's 92nd percentile performance. So only 8% of programs have more job postings per graduate than computer science. And I can, spoiler alert, tell you one of those is nursing, where that number can reach 7% in some markets and runs about 4% nationwide job postings per graduate. But we've still got plenty of jobs for computer science majors. If you're really worried, go down to your ID department and ask them how long the backlog is for projects. I can pretty much promise you there's 6 to 18 months backlog, just as they always have been. So they still need people in there working and coding, and they will for the foreseeable future. I personally believe that what's going to happen is AI is going to unleash a round of creativity. We'll be able to build more. And so, yes, a given coder can be much more productive. That could lead to either fewer coders or more code produced, more innovation. I suspect that those two are going to at least be a wash for a while. In the short term, it's probably going to be in favor of more innovation because it takes time to automate the jobs that can be automated. So it's just, there's a level of friction in deploying AI that will dampen the impact on jobs. Now, many of you may have seen the announcements of massive job cuts out there, especially in some of the high-tech companies. And they attribute that usually to AI. Personally, I think that's what I would call AI washing. So when Oracle laid off 40,000 people, that's not really because they suddenly developed AI that could replace 40,000 people. That's just a layoff. But if they go to Wall Street and say, "Our business stinks, we're going to lay off 40,000 people," that doesn't go over well. But if you say, "Oh, we're going to use AI and become more efficient," that sounds good. And so it's a much easier thing to say. The other thing that's going on at Oracle and other places is Oracle just took on commitments to deliver billions of dollars of compute capacity for AI. That money's got to come from somewhere. So I think part of what's going on in the sector is that the cost of implementing AI compute is so large that it's squeezing out jobs in other areas. And frankly, from a financial perspective, it may be more attractive than some of the areas those people were working in. So I think that's more what's going on right now than people are actually suddenly more productive and we don't need as many. I believe that's a real issue in the medium term, but I don't think it's happening quite yet at scale, my opinion. By the way, there have been studies done of people who adopted AI widely in organizations versus those who didn't. And the early adopters actually showed greater employment growth than the laggards. So keep that in mind. There's not a lot of evidence yet that AI is actually reducing jobs. And I would not say that that's not a risk as we move forward. It absolutely is. But so far, I don't think it's what's really going on out there. So wages, as we all know, they're pretty good. This is the 98th percentile for a recent college grad at $83,000. So if we see overcapacity, I'd expect to see those numbers start to drift down, which they haven't done so far. If you get a master's, it goes up to 103,000, and you can see it goes up again if you get a doctorate in this field to almost $135,000. I don't think very many U.S. employees get doctorates. I think that in computer science, because they can make so much money in the workforce, but there is a big cadre of international students who may do that. Move on. So what's going on competitively? Everybody, literally everybody, has a computer science program. You can see this scores 1 in terms of percentile and competitiveness. That means it is literally the most competitive program in the United States. So campuses with graduates, 1,100. Change in number of graduates still going up. That's a good sign. It means people are able to fill their programs and grow. And we've got 170 institutions that are doing something online. Now, we look at on-ground programs in particular, we start to see a little bit of weakness. I'm sorry, I misspoke. That's 10 more campuses with AI programs. That's not a great indicator. That means despite there being a great many, there are even more now than there were before. And we can begin to see that hit us here in year-over-year medium program size, down 1, very small change. Generally speaking, this is a program graduates about 18 people a year, so it's a good-sized program. But a drop of 1, there's a meaningful decline in a program that really hasn't declined, in my memory. So that is a concern for the program, if not for the job market. Google cost per click is very expensive, $21. That's one of the 7% of the most expensive programs per click you can have. Competition somehow is not as high as I would expect for that. So it's only a 0.2. So it's not a hugely competitive program, but it is a very expensive one. Not quite sure how that works, but that's what the data says. And finally, online, as I mentioned, it's not a hugely online program. 14% of institutions offered online, but only 11% of completions take place online. So as I mentioned, for a program that should be natural for online, it's not for some reason. So here's our overall page. This is a recap of the data that we had before, so I'm not going to go over it in detail. But I did want to point out why we put it all on one page for you. It makes it a lot easier when you're evaluating programs if you don't have to shuffle between pages for each program. Here you can see everything on a page. You can use the colors to very quickly diagnose whether it's attractive or not. You run your eye across the top, employment 98, dark green for employment, dark green for student demand, light green for competition, all very strong. And I can see my size metrics here for student demand are all dark green. That's great. I've got an issue with growth, as we talked about. I can see it immediately because it's pink. Over on employment, same sort of thing, lots of jobs, an issue with growth. So that's, again, why we put it on one page and why we color code it. So really at a glance, you can see where the issues are. And, obviously this is another one. I've got a ton of competition here. So in a few seconds, when you get good at this, you can very quickly see where the strengths and weaknesses of a given program are. There's one other piece of data we provide as well, which is cost benchmarking. And you'd expect this to be very expensive. It's a little above average, but it's not hugely expensive. It's average cost per student credit hour is 1.6. So it's about 6% more expensive than average. And at the median, it's about 11% more expensive. So it is a little bit more expensive, but not as much as you might think when you consider the wages that someone who's competent to teach this could command. Which brings me to an important point in academic cost management. It's really not a matter of how expensive the professor is or the instructor. The issue is how many students are sitting in the class. So if I have a class with 10 students in it and an instructor, that say cost $10, their cost per student credit hour is going to be a third of that. If I add one more student, the cost per student credit hour goes down by 10%. Just arithmetic. So keep that in mind. Class size matters a ton. And I think in many cases, it can outweigh the impact of expensive faculty if expensive faculty are needed in a given program. And by the way, if you're not a numbers person, you can actually read this in plain text. This is one of these crazy things our team was able to develop, where it looks at that scorecard and it writes a page for you in real time. So you can have a one-page report that you can share with folks about a given program. Now let's take a look at AI and what's going on. I heard a metaphor recently for AI, and here I'm just going to tell you what we're seeing out there in the world. And the metaphor was that AI is like electricity. In its raw form, it's actively dangerous. And it's actually useless unless you just want to give yourself a shock. You have to build stuff that uses the electricity in order to make it useful and safe. So my analogy here is that the big LLMs, whether that's Google's or ChatGPT or any of the others, they're kind of like electricity. By themselves, they've got problems, and they're not all that useful. And now there are a lot of things you can do with it. It's not exactly like electricity, but to really do anything kind of functional from a business or educational perspective, you need to build the toasters, you need to build the light bulbs, you need all sorts of customized versions of the AI to actually make it productive. So it shouldn't surprise us as these start to crop up. That's, I think, the way this is going to play out. Now, it's a bit more of a race than it was with electricity because the base models are getting more powerful, and they may overtake many of the devices, if you will, that need to be attached to make electricity. Electricity can't turn itself into a toaster, but AI seems to be able to do more on its own than you might think. So, but I think generally speaking, it's going to be a stack of vertical applications that are going to drive this. So I thought I wanted to keep a poll, and we've polled on this once before, to see over time how perceptions of AI are evolving. So the first question I would love for you to answer is, what do you see as the primary barriers to the adoption of AI at your institution? Let me know when we're complete on this. The kinds of things we've heard are data privacy, security, lack of expertise, just other priorities that need to be addressed, faculty resistance, staff resistance, budget, unclear ROI, and no clear strategy or alignment amongst the leadership team or the faculty, for that matter, on what to do with AI. Which of those are present on your campus? And if there are other things we're not considering, please put them in the chat. I'd love to hear your perspectives if we haven't captured it on the survey. Very interesting. So number one is no clear strategy or leadership, 52% mentions. Second is data privacy and security. And then we have a lack of internal expertise and faculty resistance. I think 43% is a great number on that, because I suspect about half the faculty are resistant and half are not. So 43%, I know it's just a coincidence, but that's probably about right in terms of the mix from what we're seeing out there. Not as much resistance amongst staff. And then finally, budget or unclear ROI. So I'll take a look, tell you what my perspective on that is. Though I'm not trying to say that whatever you thought wasn't true, but this is just what I've been hearing and perceiving. So there are a lot of potential applications for AI in higher ed to generate informed insights, better information for program evaluation. Obviously, we're busy doing that. There's some incredible things being done to create AI for research. I just read today that some of the big players are teaming up to create a biological database of cells that could be used to accelerate research on drugs and God knows what. Enhancing student services by creating AIs for that, helping students learn, creating assessments, providing career coaching, providing a general question and answer capability for your campus, a chatbot that contacts your students over the summer and reminds them to enroll. The list really does go on and in terms of what the potential applications are. So, question for you all is, what applications has your institution actually adopted at this point? And they range from tutoring, potentially career services help, chatbots in admissions or student services, a chatbot for general campus information, institutional research or analytics, things to improve education, administrative efficiency in HR or operations, or perhaps you're not using AI at all. And again, if there's something that we haven't listed, please feel free to add it to the chat in terms of applications you're pursuing. And how are we doing out there? Interesting. So the number one is the general purpose chatbot. Very consistent with what I've been seeing. We keep an eye on all the RFPs for AI, and this is the most frequent RFP request, is to create a chatbot to answer student questions about really just general information about the campus and what's going on at the institution. Second is admissions, and I think this is, notice both these things sit outside of the academic part of the house. I think part of that is they're some of the first applications to actually get done, but the other is they don't face the same institutional resistance that we get when we get closer to the academic side of the house. Nothing going on much in career services or tutoring, which is a shame. Institutional research and analytics also getting some real traction, and administrative efficiency getting a little bit of traction. And a handful of you out there are really not using AI at all currently, which is interesting. There are a lot of things that could and should be done on campus with AI. So whatever's holding you back, it's probably not a viable position to be out of the space. As I think about it, essentially everything on that list, if we stood back and said, what's going to be happening in 5 years, you'll have AI in every one of those places. So the question is not whether to get on board. You're going to have to get on board. The question is when and how do you address the very real barriers that exist on your campus in order to get there. So I also think we're making these a little bit too much, epic decisions. So now I'm asking a very different question here, which is, what are you really thinking about doing? What are you considering on your campus? Same list, by the way, in terms of consideration, but I wanted to distinguish between things that are actually getting done and things that are being considered, and importantly, things that are not even being considered yet. And I think all of you know, I hope, that as you do this, we do have a bias here. We offer a tutoring platform and a career services platform at this right now, and we have one also that helps coach students on communications. So it's one of the reasons for my curiosity, but I'm also very interested just in general about what's really happening with AI in higher ed. And what I intend to do over time is we'll repeat these surveys at intervals so we can see how the market is evolving. Help you all keep score too and know whether you're keeping up, if you will, with the Joneses. So interesting, there's a big gap between the percentage of folks who bought tutoring systems, I think it was down in the low teens, and the percentage who are considering, which is up to 29%. Same for career services, except even more consideration. Chatbots at admissions or student services, that's almost everybody who didn't already have them. Chatbot for general campus information, that's interesting that would fall back so much. You'll remember that was about 45%. It could be that the folks who've adopted or have done it, but there's still a slug of folks out there who are looking at it. And yes, research and analytics and administrative efficiency actually lead the charge here. I think we're going to continue to see this slope, if you will, from things that touch students and instructors to things that don't. And if you're in the don't category, AI is going to come faster than if you're in the instruction space. By the way, no good reason for that, but it is real. So here's what we're actually seeing out there. First, as we saw really in some of those metrics, fear is abundant. And you all mentioned the number one fear, which is security and confidentiality. Very real issue. Doesn't need to be if you use the right AI systems, but without them, it's very much an issue. Please don't go put confidential or personal information into a general purpose chatbot unless you have a corporate subscription or a personal subscription where where the AIs do not use your information to train their core models. Cognitive decline is a very interesting issue that students, all of us using this, may actually have our cognitive abilities impeded because we're essentially passing that work off to AI. And it's a little bit like going to the gym and watching somebody else do the work. You do not get stronger when you do that. Another issue that's very real is AI psychosis. I think there are a bunch of different flavors of this, but certainly one is the development of affection between people and their AI that can lead to very serious negative outcomes like suicide, cheating, and environmental damage, all concerns that people have. I'm going to pick on one of these, which is AI cheating. I believe the data says that AI cheating is significantly overestimated. And the algorithms that do this are highly inaccurate, despite their claims. And they're causing us to accuse students of cheating who are not cheating, which is very demoralizing and in some cases actively harmful. I was speaking with one woman who was assisting her niece, as I recall, in a healthcare course, and the woman's a nurse. And she was there the entire time the student wrote the essay. And then the student was given an F in the course because she had allegedly used an AI. And as I say, she was monitored the entire time. She did not use an AI. But the professor in the institution would not change the grade. So be careful with this stuff. I think there are better ways, if you suspect a student of cheating, of checking for that without doing them harm. My personal suggestion, invite them into your office and effectively give them an oral exam. Very hard to cheat in front of you. And I think something as serious as failing a student warrants that level of attention. There may also be other techniques you're familiar with that you can use. I encourage you to use them. I'm not saying that people don't cheat with AI, but my suspicion is cheating is as frequent as it always has been. It's the same students it always been. And yes, they can use AI to cheat, but they've been finding ways to cheat for decades. So I wouldn't assume that cheating is more prevalent now than it was in the past. And please be careful with the algorithms that diagnose it. There's some other familiar barriers that are barriers to, almost any initiative. Budgets are spoken for. So where are you going to find budget for AI? It's not as though you had spare change. IT issues and the IT backlog gets in the way. Faculty workloads are high. They don't want another thing to do. Then there are the curmudgeons in change. And, those come along and they're not unusual, whether you're in corporate America or higher ed. There are people who are going to be very vocal opponents of change. And there's enough real issues here that they can come very well informed and be very vocal. There are other more technical problems. Integrating content for RAG is fairly complex. Now, RAG is research augmented generation. So these are models that read text that you provide and then provide, use that to inform their answers. It's a little bit of a pain to do. There are dozens of file types that get used in higher ed. They all have to be ingested. They have to be translated. If they're too long, they have to be broken up, and ultimately all have to be vectorized. So that's a complex automation chain. If you haven't got it built, that's a fair amount of work. The thing that surprised us was the amount of customization needed by discipline. Of course, you've got to have custom content. You all have that in your course material, but you also need to do things to the AI to make it work in a given course or discipline. So, for example, in a beginning language course, you've got a problem because the AI is fluent and it will respond to we were doing this in Italian to a student in fluent Italian. But if you're a beginning Italian student, you have a vocabulary of 10 to 40 words. So you can't understand anything the AI is saying. So we had to go in and manipulate it so that the vocabulary the AI was using was consistent with what the student had learned at that point. And I think we're going to find other areas for that. In effect, we have to dumb down the AI and bring the student, have the AI evolve with the student in the subject. And then there are little things that you wouldn't think of initially, but if you're doing math or sciences, you need a symbolic keyboard. That is not trivial to do on a regular keyboard. So you have to build tools that make that much easier for the student. or those, it just becomes very difficult in those subjects. So I think we're going to find as this evolves that there are many other customizations that are needed to be appropriate for an individual discipline. Another surprise we ran into is users need guidance. You would expect that they'd go into an AI and they'd know to ask questions and such, but the first thing we got was, what question should I ask? What can it do? How do I use it? So we need to recognize that that's a real issue and provide the guidance that folks need in order to get started with this. And I think we're also going to be evolving things that it can do and questions that are relevant to ask. So in effect, keeping a running list of what it can do and what to ask is going to be important as the AIs evolve and become more robust. Then we're after adoption. And one of the hard lessons we learned is that you're not going to get AI adopted if it doesn't make the professor's life easier or the instructor's life easier. It has to save them time. They're not going to do one more thing just because it's AI. So very important that there are features in the AIs that you use that are designed for the professor to make their work better and faster without compromising, by the way, the quality of the core educational work that they do. Administrative things around AI are not an afterthought. They're actually critical for both faculty and administrators to be able to see how many people used it. What did they use it for? What questions confuse students? What are the most common topics in the chats and so forth, so that they can keep track of what's going on in their courses or across courses easily. Not something we thought was critical. I think we initially thought that the key thing was to do what students needed. Turns out you've really got to pay attention to faculty administration as well. This is something that shouldn't be overlooked. The people who use it like it. That didn't have to be true, but it is. So I think for the skeptics, it's a little bit, we need to sort of get them in there to try it, because a well-designed system that's designed for higher ed does work. It supports pedagogy. It doesn't degrade it. It supports cognition. It doesn't degrade it. But it has to be a custom app that's designed to be used in higher ed, not a general purpose AI where those issues are very real. Another interesting lesson was small tests don't scale. They wither. I think many institutions are thinking, well, I'll test this in a handful of courses and see what happens, and then I'll scale it up. Doesn't really work from what I've seen. It's not big enough to get any momentum. So, it just dies away if you're not careful. So I would say if you're going to try this, you've got to try it with enough scale that if successful, that the initiative will have enough momentum to carry on to other places in the institution. Now, I mentioned critical thinking. It's such an important issue. I'm just going to spend a minute on it. And when you talk to people who actually use this stuff, the instructors created use cases that actually drove critical thinking. So they got improvements in performance on the tests. These are not standard, these are not, I guess they are multiple choice tests, but these are challenging tests. And the students' scores actually went up on these tests because their interaction with the tool supported deeper learning and knowledge application, not just answering quizzes. They're actually doing simulations of issues in healthcare and having to respond to go through their, in this case, nursing practice and critical thinking to figure out what to do in that situation. So she believed that this was actually functioned as a scaffold for clinical reasoning, not a detriment to it. And it does save time. In particular, this instructor was able to use it for exam questions, which are very difficult, well, I shouldn't say difficult, time-consuming to create. She had tried ChatGPT, but it wasn't designed for her course. So the questions weren't really well adapted, and she had to redo it. Here, where if you train it on the material in a course, it can generate questions that are relevant and appropriate for the course. So really does save time. As I mentioned, if you want to get this adopted on your campus, you've got to have a message for the instructors that's attractive. That's everything for today. A few thoughts in summary. Enrollment is going up. The overall market seems healthy, not growing fast, but it's not declining. The fastest growing areas over the last 5 years have been cybersecurity and data analytics. Unfortunately for us, but good for our country, job postings are up 15% year over year. Fastest growing occupation was industrial engineer. And there's a exploding need for people with Amazon Web Services skills. And I suspect if you looked a little more deeply in the data beyond the top 10 or 15, you'd find that's true for all the other web services providers, whether that's Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud. Demand for a bachelor's in computer science remains strong, but it's dipping a little bit. The decline in jobs for computer science graduates, in my opinion, is grossly exaggerated. It's still a huge employment market. There's still 2 jobs for every graduate. It is a concern, but I don't think that cliff hasn't hit yet. And raw AI may be dangerous and ill-suited to teaching in higher ed, but you can create custom applications in higher ed, the toasters, if you will, that sit on top of those and make it safe and useful. That's it for today. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And look forward to getting back together with you again next month, May 28th at 2 p.m. for the next Demand Trends webinar.